This week I am talking about inspiration. The topic this week is we're making inspiring videos, and so I thought about for my inspiring topic this week, I actually wanted to talk about people who are inspirations in recovery or who have inspired me personally. Not all of these people necessarily have had eating disorders, but when you're recovering from an eating disorder, I think we all tend to want to look to somebody as a role model, especially when we're trying to figure out who we are ourselves. And you know, I feel kind of at this point in my life, I don't necessarily think that I'm anybody special or great or wonderful. But when you start to do good things with your life and start to move forward and start to make positive changes, you will inspire people. And you don't live on an island, and so it doesn't matter what you do. If you're doing negative things, then you're going to affect people. If you're doing positive things, you're going to affect people, and that doesn't matter who you are. You have to acknowledge at some point that you're not an island, and that no matter what you do in life, you're going to affect somebody. So that may be positive or negative, and some of the positive things you do may be interpreted negatively by people, and they will be interpreted positively by people. I know that this is true with me, and this is going to be true with you. And one of the things that you have to accept also is that the more you change and the more that you try to live your life true to who you are and true to who you're becoming and true to your real self, then the greater effect you're going to have on people. If you look at people like Mother Teresa, for example, she inspired literally billions of people and was well known. But she didn't start her life out that way with that intention. It's just she was so true to herself, in my perception, and there's no perfect human being, okay? So I'm sure that she did things that offended people, that people disapproved of, and that people could be critical of, as do all of us. I'm definitely not a perfect person, and I'm definitely a critical person sometimes, and so, while I try to be positive, I'm not perfect, and not perfect in recovery, not perfect in anything. And I have my own struggles that I deal with every day. But overall, I try to live my life so that I'm true to myself, and that causes a ripple effect in my life and in everybody else around me. And I try to be fair and try to I try to be altruistic and helpful to other people. However, I also don't let people walk over me. And being a quote-unquote nice person doesn't mean that you let people walk all over you and that you are not true to yourself. What you have to do to recover is that you have to try to live your life so that you have healthy boundaries with people. That means that you're true to yourself and that you don't blame other people for your problems, because when you get to a point of inspiring or being an inspiration, what I think that really means is that you have come to a point where you accept that you have some responsibility in what happens to your life. And that doesn't mean that you're responsible for other people's choices. It doesn't mean you're responsible for things like abuse that may have happened or may happen to you. But you are responsible once you become aware of certain relationship cycles, of how you participate to keep dysfunctional cycles going. And this is especially important in recovery because we tend to want to not take responsibility for our problems and tend to want to validate negativity within ourselves by saying, well, so-and-so called me fat, or, whatever it is, then that's what made me do my eating disordered behavior. However, you have to admit to yourself that, okay, so-and-so called you fat, but you chose, instead of coping using another skill to cope, to do your eating disorder behavior. And that doesn't mean that you are bad or that you are not recovering, because it takes a while to develop those skills. But you do have to admit that you made that choice. And with that said, you don't say, I've made this choice and now I screwed up. You say, okay, I made this choice this time, and this was how I coped, and I was overwhelmed, and it may have been, how I got through that moment. But reflecting on what led you to that, reflecting on how you could do things differently next time. That's what leads to people who are inspirational. So with that said, I'm going to tell you about a few people in my life who are inspirational. Okay, first of all, there's a woman in my neighborhood, and she's in her 60s, and she's a psychiatric nurse, actually. She's a really good friend of mine, and she, I think, besides my husband, was the first person outside of a therapist who I was working with who really did not help my eating disorder and did not know anything about eating disorder treatment. So consequently, things kind of got worse on that end, but I won't go there right now. But anyway, she was the first person who inspired me in recovery, and the reason why she inspired me in recovery was because she listened to me, and she was able to speak my language, speak the language of my eating disorder. And also, she didn't have an eating disorder herself, but she was completely non-judgmental about it. And where I was beating myself up as a person, and really to some degree my therapist at that time was using a lot of shaming techniques to try to get me to improve. I don't think he realized that's what he was doing, but that's what he was doing. And validating my negativity, she didn't do that, and she became a safe place for me. So that was my first inspiration in recovery. And then, she was able to share some of the things in her life that had been struggles in her life and challenges, and she had many of them. And I was able to look at the example of her life, and, I wouldn't say she's old. I don't know, 60 to me is not that old, but she was, had more life experience than I did, and had grown children, and I could see how she was able to cope positively in her life, and the things that she was able to do as a single mother of 4 children in becoming, getting eventually a PhD in nursing, and becoming a college professor, and doing all kinds of great things. And she still does all kinds of great things. She's retired now, but that to me was an inspiration in recovery. And the eating disorder therapist that I also finally found she was similar. She talked to me and to my true self, and modeled that to me, instead of talking to my eating disorder and reinforcing the shame. So that was an inspiration to me. And then I found ultra running. Ultra running became actually a healthy thing for me, and it's still a healthy thing for me. And that's one of the points that some people are critical for me on, because they believe that it's all over exercise, and really it's not about the exercise, it's about the mindset behind it. And I don't have time to go into it because it's a touchy issue. But for me, ultra running was a great motivator for me. So I'm going to put a couple of links in this video. And one ultra runner I'm going to tell you about, there's many, and I have many friends, but here's one of my friends. His name's Davy Crockett, so I chose him because, cliche name. I'm going to put a link to his blog. But, he wasn't a great runner, and now he is working on, he's fairly fast, but he's not the fastest ultra runner, but he does lots of ultra runs every year. And he's, to me, an amazing person, because he has a full-time job, he has a balanced family life, and, I see him out on the trails. He's a great inspiration to me. So that's another inspiring person. I'm running out of time. I was going to talk about more people actually with eating disorders in recovery. There are many, but one person in particular that I decided to bring up is because I know a lot of people here have watched the movie Thin, but Shelley Galori is a friend of mine, and she has dealt with a lot of addictions in her life, and to me, I've dealt with the eating disorder and a lot of addictive behaviors, a lot of obsessive behaviors, but, as far as like actual drug addictions and things like that, I haven't dealt as much with that. And so, to me, I'm going to post a link to her blog.